Welcome to Doctorates of the Absurd, your provider of belief on demand.
And welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is to take that complex stack of sources you shared with us, all the dense articles, the specific research, the raw notes, and really transform that material into clear, synthesized insight.
We want to be your shortcut to being well-informed.
Exactly.
And today, we are tackling a colossal question. It's one that sits really right at the intersection of history, philosophy, and our current technological moment.
It's a dive set against, well, a soundtrack of the past 60 years. And it's going to force us and you to wrestle with the nature of art, authenticity, and ultimate kind of devastating failure.
Yeah, that's the word for it. We're diving deep into the philosophical engine that explains why this digital age, specifically the rise of perfect deepfake technology, is the ultimate sign that, according to some of our most challenging thinkers, the real has died.
It's a big claim.
Yeah.
But our sources map a very clear, almost cyclical, and frankly, a disturbing narrative arc.
And that arc starts, maybe counterintuitively, in the supposed revolutionary promise of the 1960s, with music that was meant to change the world.
And it ends today, in the quiet, almost indifferent acceptance of listeners towards an AI that can flawlessly steal the voice of a musician.
So the core binary we're examining, the main tension here,
Yeah.
what is it?
It's this fundamental conflict between, on one hand, the real, which is rooted in, authentic action, material consequence.
Things that actually happen and have effects.
Precisely. And on the other hand, the simulacrum, which is a world made only of signs, of copies, of comfortable simulations.
And we have to analyze how that second one, the simulacrum, just kind of devours the first one.
That's the mission. See how it wins.
Okay, so the existential itch here, the central drama we're posing for you, is really about the ultimate defeat of the activist or the critic or the artist.
It's that nagging question.
Does the art we love, the albums we champion, do they actually cause profound societal transformation? Or is it all instantly absorbed, stripped of its critical edge, and just rendered harmless by the very system it's trying to critique?
And our goal isn't just to, catalog this failure. It's to understand the mechanism of that absorption.
The hidden rule.
The hidden rule that governs how the simulacrum wins. And if we can understand that, we can move past just talking about the failure of the 60s to understanding why the AI deepfake was, in a way, inevitable.
Okay, let's start with the punch in the gut then. What if the most lauded, historically significant, and supposedly revolutionary music of the 1960s was actually less popular than the soundtrack to The Sound of Music?
It's a wild thought, but it's true.
So we begin by unpacking the ultimate documented defeat of rock and roll.
To really grasp this tension, we have to look at what historians call the long 60s, which is roughly 1958 to 1972.
Okay.
And our sources highlight this massive disparity between the cultural stories we tell about that decade and the actual consumption habits of that decade.
The myth versus the reality.
Exactly. Historians and critics really fall into two distinct opposing poles on this.
So let's lay them out. Pole A is, I guess it's the one we all know, right? The glorious, enduring myth of cultural revolution.
That's it. This is the narrative from people like Arthur Marwick or John Savage. They looked at the protest songs, the psychedelia, the huge festivals, Woodstock, Monterey, all of it. And they concluded that music wasn't just accompanying social change. It was a major transformative force across the West.
So it's a revolutionary soundtrack, a genuine agent of systemic shift.
That's the argument, that the aesthetic changes, the clothes, the lyrics, the album-oriented rock, that all of this was inseparable from the political and social emancipation movements. The music was building a collective identity that felt genuinely separate from and critical of the establishment.
Okay, that's the story we've all been sold. But then you have Pole B.
Pole B, the harsh reality of conservative consumption.
And this is the counter-evidence, right? From critics like Peter Doggett and the historian Dominic Sandbrook.
Yes, and they articulate a much more complicated and honestly a much sadder truth about the mass market.
How do they do that?
They just look at the raw data, the sales figures, and they point out that, well, the cultural vanguard was busy celebrating the summer of love and this supposed countercultural takeover.
The vast majority of consumers were buying something entirely different.
Completely different. And this is the data that you have to emphasize.
Yep.
Because it just reframes the entire decade.
So what were they buying?
Doggett and Sandbrook show that the top-selling albums of the mid-1960s, this is the supposed peak of revolutionary fervor, were decidedly not the Beatles' more experimental work. Not Dylan. not the Rolling Stones.
I feel like I know where this is going.
We're talking specifically about 1965 and 1966. The two biggest records in the world were the soundtracks to The Sound of Music and Mary Poppins.
Both starring Julie Andrews.
Both starring Julie Andrews, and both completely dominating the charts, while music history books tell us the counterculture was sweeping the nation.
You really have to stop and think about that contradiction for a moment. 1966 is the year John Savage called the year the decade exploded.
Right.
So while the vanguard is experimenting with acid rock, you have the Velvet Underground exploding musical and social boundaries. But millions of people were willingly buying albums that, far from challenging the status quo, they deeply reinforced it.
And Sandbrook's analysis gives us the why. He gives us the socioeconomic context. He writes that these incredibly popular soundtracks were rooted in a vision of the world based on romantic love, traditional family life, familiar morality.
So in a period of huge change, the swinging 60s, these albums offered millions of people a crucial sense of reassurance, stability.
Exactly. And this is where we have to elaborate on his modern Victorian theory, because it's key to understanding the mass consumer at that time.
The modern Victorian, what does that mean?
The people buying The Sound of Music weren't necessarily, politically reactionary, but they were deeply conservative in their personal and familial goals.
Mm-hmm. So they were caught between the promise of post-war affluence and all the instability of the Cold War, the rapid social change.
Right. They prioritized financial prudence, stable careers, a defined, safe place for their children, and the loud, chaotic, often sexually explicit, and definitely chemically induced rock music of the counterculture was a direct threat to that stable, familiar vision of life.
So the marketplace, where the vast majority of actual spending power was governed by a need for comfortable stability, not disruptive revolution.
And by choosing Julie Andrews, the masses were performing a deeply conservative act. They were using pop culture as a kind of emotional ballast against the changing tide.
It's fascinating. And Doggett, he summarizes the historical verdict on this perfectly, right?
Yes, he says these massive top sellers are relegated to a footnote in the history of popular music. And why? Because the canon, the official list of what's historically important, it valorizes the revolutionary attempt.
So the music that made no attempt to alter the culture or educate the listener is basically deemed unworthy of history.
Even if it was commercially dominant. The cultural gatekeepers, in effect, just ignored the consumer reality in favor of the revolutionary myth.
Which means the attempted cultural revolution was fundamentally a niche movement. It was happening on the margins, while the mainstream continued to embrace those traditional legacies, the aesthetic equivalent of a warm blanket.
Which brings us to the core mechanism of this cultural defeat, the absorption of protest. And this is where we need to introduce two key concepts, hegemony and praxis. This is how a revolutionary aesthetic gets, neutered.
Okay, let's define these so they don't just float around abstractly. Let's start with hegemony.
So the late cultural theorist Stuart Hall defines hegemony not as, brute force, but as political and cultural domination achieved through consent.
Consent.
Yeah, it's the idea that the ruling class maintains control by constantly negotiating with and absorbing potential challenges. So for Hall, popular culture is this ongoing struggle where, as he puts it, relations of control and subordination are constantly shifting.
So for the 1960s music, the crucial point is that the assimilation of protest, taking a rebellious style, stripping its truly disruptive meaning, and then selling it to everyone.
That does not undermine hegemony, but rather stabilizes it.
That's a huge idea.
It is. Think of it this way. If a rebellious message is challenging the system doesn't just shut it down, it packages it.
It turns the look of rebellion, the ripped jeans, the tie-dye, the long hair, into something you can buy.
Exactly, a commodity. If the counterculture starts selling millions of records or T-shirts, the system hasn't been defeated. It has just proven its superior ability to commodify and control the rebellion itself.
So the system gets stronger by digesting its own critique?
It's the immune system of the status quo. That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so that's hegemony. Now let's contrast that with what the artists were supposedly aiming for. Praxis.
Right. Praxis is the concept that links theory to action. It's the act of turning these high ideological goals like equality or FDR's Four Freedoms or JFK's whole ask not what your country can do for you challenge
into collective material action that results in genuine systemic change.
The music was intended to be the praxis, the engine of emancipation. The shared experience of listening was supposed to translate into shared collective political action.
But it didn't. And the sources confirm the profound disappointment of the artists themselves.
Yeah, they suggest the music really failed as a transformative praxis. We have two really powerful quotes that just capture the sense of futility.
The first is from David Crosby, right?
Yes. Reflecting critically on the height of the movement in 1968, he just stated it plainly. He said, somehow, Straight Pepper did not stop the Vietnam War. Somehow it didn't work. Somebody isn't listening.
That's brutal. The revolutionary promise just felt nullified by the reality of geopolitical violence.
And John Lennon was equally disillusioned. He observed the persistent structures of power. He said, we all dressed up, the same bastards are in control, the same people are running everything. It is exactly the same.
So the signs of rebellion were everywhere, but the core political and economic realities, they were untouched.
The rhetoric was potent, the music was the vehicle for a shared identity, but the actual systemic shift was just absorbed and neutralized by those larger, more conservative consumption patterns we saw with the sound of music.
Now, you said to truly appreciate the difficulty of praxis, we should look at an exception.
We should. We have to briefly look at civil rights music, because this music, unlike the more abstract aesthetic rebellion of psychedelic rock, was explicitly about praxis.
Right. So artists like Sam Cooke with A Change Is Gonna Come or Nina Simone with Mississippi Goddamn, they weren't singing about abstract peace and love.
Not at all. They were communicating specific, concrete grievances. They were defining the immediate purpose of the movement to end racism, to achieve material equality now.
And because that music was so explicit, the reaction from the hegemonic structure was different.
Very different. Sam Cooke's move to address social ills was professionally risky. The white crossover audience preferred to see black artists as these exceptional individuals who had, transcended their circumstances.
Not as representatives communicating a collective oppression. That honesty was a threat.
It was a huge threat.
Oh.
And Simone's style was. It was rage-filled. It demanded immediate action. It replaced the passive go slow with a call for now. And because her music truly threatened the prevailing ideology and demanded immediate praxis,
the forces of hegemony didn't just assimilate it, they tried to censor it.
They did. Our sources note that promotional copies of Mississippi Goddamn were reportedly smashed by a radio station in Carolina and returned to her label.
Wow.
And that shows a critical distinction. When the music is abstract and stylistic, it gets assimilated. That's hegemony. But when the music is explicit and demands immediate material action, it's met with forceful resistance. That's a genuine threat to praxis.
So by the end of the long 60s, the contradiction is stark. The revolutionary music was successfully assimilated as a style, while mass-market nostalgia governed consumer reality. The system proved spectacularly immune to aesthetic critique.
It really did.
So, if the 60s proved the system could swallow a revolution, we need the philosophical framework to explain the mechanism behind that absorption.
Right.
And this is where we transition from history to, well, the truly mind-bending work of Jean Baudrillard. This is what explains why the failure of the 60s was inevitable and why the deepfake is so potent today.
Baudrillard provides the fatal logic. He turns that historical failure into the definitive diagnosis of the postmodern world. And he does it by attacking the fundamental, foundational notion of reality itself.
What's his core argument?
He argues that we have moved from a modern society that was organized around commodity production, the manufacturing of things.
Right, making cars, making TVs.
Yes, to a society organized entirely around simulation.
This is the critical transition point for you, the listener. In the modern world, signs like a corporate logo or a piece of music, they were supposed to refer directly to a real underlying concept or truth.
But in the world of simulation, that connection is severed.
And that severed link is the simulacrum. We have to treat this as the core conceptual tool for this entire deep dive.
It's the key.
So let's do concept decoder. Simulacrum. What's the cocktail party definition?
The cocktail party definition is a copy, an image, or a model that has lost all reference to an original reality. It's the fake that acts realer than the real thing.
A copy without an original?
Baudrillard's definition is that precise. A copy without an original. It is the image of what once was called reality.
So in this framework, signs don't refer to reality anymore. They just refer to
other signs. It creates an entirely self-referential universe, a closed lib.
Okay, can we make this less abstract, maybe with a modern example?
Sure. Think about a perfectly curated Instagram feed. You know the ones, professional lighting, aspirational quotes, perfect vacation photos. That feed is a simulacrum. It's the perfect sign of a happy, fulfilled life. But that sign is constructed from other signs, filters, poses, references to other perfect feeds. It doesn't necessarily correspond to the chaotic, messy real life of the person posting it.
The sign is perfect. The reality is optional.
Exactly. And Baudrillard traces the origin of this fatal logic back to the most ancient, most powerful simulation of all, the representation of divinity.
God.
Yes. He says if God could be simulated, represented in human-made icons, paintings, images, it meant the entire theological system became weightless.
That is a profound thought. If divinity can be reduced to the signs which attest his existence, then the external guaranteed reference point, the external truth that anchors the whole system, is destroyed.
Right. It removes the need for faith because you can just look at the sign, the icon, as proof.
And this is the hidden mechanism that governs our core binary.
Yes. The rule is, when the simulacrum achieves hyperreality, it doesn't just copy the real, it actively devours it. And that results in a world where signs only exchange value amongst themselves.
Okay, let's spend a moment on that poem, Hyperreality, because this isn't just about feeling confused, right? It's about a preferred state of existence.
That's the key. Let's do another decoder. Hyperreality. The cocktail party definition would be the state where the artificial, the model, or the simulation is indistinguishable from or actively preferred over the real thing it was supposed to represent.
The perfect, sterile copy.
And we prefer the hyperreal because it's clean, it's predictable, it's digestible.
It's what makes the perfect sign more satisfying than the messy, contradictory original.
And when the simulation achieves this state, it replaces the original. Just like a beautifully designed theme park replaces the complex, dirty history of the location it was built on.
This leads us right to the mic drop quote from our sources, the one that sums up this whole weightless system.
Yes. Baudrillard writes, "It is no longer anything but a gigantic simulacrum. Not unreal, but a simulacrum, never again exchanging for what is real, but exchanging in itself in an uninterrupted circuit without reference or circumference."
An uninterrupted circuit without reference. That describes a self-propelled machine of signification. The logic of the system just refers to itself, perpetually exchanging value internally.
And our sources apply this logic with terrifying clarity to modern media consumption.
How so?
Baudrillard argues that in hyperreality, the media have complete control over the real time and the real reality. It stops being a window onto the world and instead functions like a parasitic or intestinal flora.
I have to stop on that metaphor because it's so powerful. If the media is intestinal flora, that means the news isn't a direct line to reality. It's an enzyme that digests reality for safe consumption.
Precisely. The media allows us to metabolize the violence of the world. It turns global conflict or catastrophe, the true, messy praxis of conflict, into a consumable substance.
So it's designed not to educate you toward action, but to give you a momentary, safe sense of outrage or concern, which then just dissipates.
It does. The genuine pain, the true need for political action in a conflict zone, is reduced to a spectacle you watch on TV. That spectacle feeds the machine, stabilizes the system, and it blocks up the screen hole through which the substance of events might actually escape and require a genuine intervention from you.
So the information loses itself in a completely unreal space.
It does. The media and promotion are the most thick-skinned parasite in our culture. They turn war itself into advertising, ensuring that the critical potential of any event is absorbed into the consumer circuit. It's the exact same mechanism that neutralized the protest music of the 1960s.
And this philosophical concept, it also applies perfectly to the aesthetic realm, which brings us right back to music. You call it cultural canonization as simulation.
Yes, and the ultimate, almost satirical example of this, drawn from our sources, is the Voyager Golden Record.
Right, launched in 1977. A curated selection of human culture music, sounds, images sent into space as a greeting card to any extraterrestrials.
It included masterpieces. Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, Chuck Berry's Rock and Roll.
On the surface, it's this incredibly noble act of self-representation, an eternal portrait of humanity's aesthetic value.
But if you apply Baudrillard's critique, this philosophical reading is devastating.
Why? What's the key?
The audience. The probe is likely to wander the Milky Way for billions of years. The chance of aliens finding it with a working hi-fi player is, well, it's essentially zero.
As our source material noted, it's like finding a needle on a planet made entirely out of hay.
Right. So the real audience wasn't the aliens. The real audience was the committee, headed by Carl Sagan, and the academics involved in the selection process.
So they were performing An act of self-consecration.
They were indulging in the music lover's ultimate fantasy, anthologizing their own listening preferences in an act of consecration likely to outlive humanity itself. They were immortalizing their idea of what human culture should be.
So the Voyager Golden Record is the perfect simulacrum of culture.
It is. It's a selection of music completely stripped of its context, its original audience, its history, its political or social purpose. It's a sign of humanity's aesthetic value sent into the void, exchanged only within the committee's private, hyper-real fantasy.
It's pure sign, completely weightless, and utterly detached from the real praxis of that music.
And now the logic is formalized. The commercial system can neutralize protest music by absorbing its sign value, and the aesthetic system can simulate cultural value by canonizing it out of context. The perfect copy of the simulated sign is preferred, and often it murders the original model's relevance.
So if Baudrillard provides the mechanism, we now need the modern proof. Where do we see this hyperreality fully realized today?
Right, in the perfect simulated aesthetic, driven by technology.
Which brings us to deepfakes.
Exactly. We move now to deepfakes in music. AI is creating hyper-realistic audio that perfectly mimics renowned human voices. And this brings us right back to that question of authenticity and emotional value in the face of the perfect sign.
The sheer volume of this AI-generated content is staggering, and our sources review this massive 2025 study. What did it look at?
It analyzed over 31,000 YouTube comments on deepfake music tracks. And the findings are the core evidence that the human voice might just be the ultimate, easily reproducible simulacrum.
What was the main takeaway?
Well, the study's most striking general finding was a surprising predominance of positive and neutral sentiments towards deepfake music, especially in genres like rock, pop, and cartoon.
So this isn't the widespread moral panic we might expect. It suggests a deep and growing acceptance of simulated voices as, aesthetically satisfactory.
It does. But the analysis provides a crucial qualifier. It shows listeners aren't completely oblivious to the nature of the copy.
Okay, what's the qualifier?
The negative reactions were more pronounced when renowned human voices are mimicked.
Ah, that's a really significant distinction. It suggests that listeners aren't reacting negatively to the sound quality or the emotional performance or the aesthetic value of the song itself.
All of which are now functionally satisfactory. They are reacting to the violation of the sign value attached to a celebrity brand, a personality. They care about the person being faked, not the act of faking itself.
So the machine has mastered the art, but the listeners are still struggling with the ethics of identity theft.
Exactly. But crucially, the acceptance of this simulated art means the aesthetic criteria for authenticity are being eroded.
The study also offers a powerful longitudinal insight, looking at how this is changing over time across different genres.
It does, and it shows that one genre in particular remains a critical cultural battleground.
Okay, let's break down that genre acceptance. In rap, hip-hop, and cartoon music, what happens?
The novelty effect is vanishing. We see that in a declining volume of comments over time. It's becoming normalized.
Which makes sense culturally, right? Rap and hip-hop have a long history of technological mediation.
A huge history. From heavy use of sampling, which is a form of audio collage, to the integration of auto-tune, which can render the human voice almost robotic. The audience there already accepts that the voice is often a digitally modified object.
So AI mimicry is just one more layer of mediation. It's not a huge leap.
Not at all. But rock pop is trending in the opposite direction. And this is the battleground.
What's happening there?
This genre shows an increase in the volume of comments and a growing negative sentiment.
So why is rock and roll fighting the simulacrum harder than hip-hop?
Because rock and roll is culturally predicated on the mythology of authenticity. Its entire history is built on this idea of the flawed, unique, passionate human performer whose soul, or spirit, is conveyed through the natural, unmediated imperfection of their voice.
So the rock audience, steeped in that mythology, views the deepfake not just as a simulation, but as a direct assault on the very concept of human originality, on the value of a singular, flawed performance.
And the more famous the voice, the higher the celebrity status attached, the more pronounced the negative reaction to the deepfake.
This analysis provides the perfect modern proof for another of Baudrillard's concepts, right? The idea of fatal strategies.
It does. And this is a powerful, difficult concept, so we need to clarify it for you, the listener, because it completely flips our assumptions about power.
Okay, another concept decoder, fatal strategies. What's the cocktail party definition?
It's the recognition that the object, the technology, the system, the algorithm, is often smarter, shrewder, and more capable than the subject, which is the human user or artist. It renders our attempts to control it ultimately futile.
So in what he calls banal strategies, we, the human subjects, believe we're smarter than the object. We think we can outwit the algorithm or control the AI.
But in a fatal strategy, we have to recognize that the object is always supposed to be more shrewd, more cynical, more brilliant than the subject.
Okay, let's ground this. Let's use a concrete, modern analogy that will hit close to home for anyone who listens to digital music.
Let's talk about your algorithmically generated music recommendation list. Spotify, Apple Music, whatever you use.
Okay, so I spend hours trying to find a new artist. I categorize my tastes. I define what I think I want. I am the subject trying to assert my musical autonomy.
But the algorithm is the object. It observes 100,000 other listeners who share 90% of your listening data. And it predicts your next move, not based on your stated preferences, but on your actual past behavior you might not even realize you exhibit.
And it suggests a song you've never heard of and you love it.
Right. And the aha moment is realizing the algorithm is that shrewder, cynical object that dictates your taste better than you, the subject, can even articulate it.
It knows the sign I want to consume before I know I want to consume it.
And that's the deepfake success. The deepfake is the culmination of the 1960s failure in audio form. The AI, can perfectly simulate the emotional resonance of the human subject, and the majority response is acceptance, because the aesthetic criteria are satisfied.
The machine dominates the subject.
The object defeats the subject.
So we have this devastating philosophical diagnosis. The real is dead, consumed by the hyperreal simulacrum, and the perfect simulated object is now capable of defeating the human subject. The temptation is to just fall into a state of cultural despair, right? To be paralyzed by too much information.
Right. And this paralysis is what our sources refer to metaphorically as the Library of Babel.
The Library of Babel, a concept from Borges. It's a philosophical dead end. It contains the totality of all knowledge, every truth, every eloquently written solution, every perfect song.
But because it contains everything, the sheer overwhelming volume of information makes that knowledge utterly inaccessible.
Joy quickly turns to despair.
It does. The problem isn't the text itself. It's the lack of any meaningful catalog or index to rationalize the infinite volume. Today, we call this streaming fatigue, or the paradox of choice.
Infinite music, infinite opinions, and these infinite categorization systems. Highbrow, middlebrow, lowbrow.
And those rigid categories are where the cultural dead end truly lies. Our sources say they are manifestly inadequate as tools of audience classification, yet they persist.
They define what people are, a fixed category of consumer, rather than what they do. They box you in.
So we need a model for engagement, one that bypasses this paralyzing categorization and allows us to navigate the hyperreal without being swallowed by its binaries. We need a survival guide for the age of simulation.
And we find this model in the work of Walter Benjamin.
Yes, the flaneur.
The flaneur, the curious, detached observer of the modern metropolis. The philosophical walker. Benjamin's concept provides a philosophical guide for navigating this deluge of signs and commodification without becoming trapped by them.
The flaneur operates in the between spaces. They're detached from the crowd, but still immersed in it. They possess this special knowledge that they are, in the end, still just one of them.
So they interact with culture not as a passive categorized consumer, but as a proactive assembler of fragments.
And this model draws on two related figures in Benjamin's work. The rag picker, who recycles culture from capitalism's debris, and the collector, who assembles new constellations of meaning from fragments. It's a way of asserting autonomy by actively working against the dominant current of consumption.
Okay, so the flaneur refuses to accept the fixed, established value of an object. To the system, an old object might be trash or disposable.
But to the rag picker flaneur, the debris of the old, the forgotten fragment, the discarded sign, is the raw material for creating something new and valuable.
This is the master analogy integration for our deep dive. It links the flaneur directly to a specific modern music practice.
Sampling culture.
Right. Sampling culture takes the leftovers and debris of the old. A forgotten drum break from a 70s soul record, a tiny vocal fragment from a 90s commercial, a forgotten bass line.
And it uses those pieces to build something fundamentally new and unpredictable. It defies fixed hierarchies. It defies linear narratives of progress.
So this is the perfect antidote to the simulacrum. The simulacrum aims to make a perfect copy that replaces the original.
But sampling, conversely, takes the broken, imperfect fragment, It acknowledges its past, and then it gives it a new, unpredictable purpose. It forces meaning back into the sign by creating a new context.
And this approach focuses not on what people are, a category like highbrow or lowbrow, but what they do, an act of nomadic, unpredictable interpretation.
This recognizes the rhizomatic, the uncontrolled expansion in music available to all listeners, where genres dissolve and are in this constant state of mutation.
So the ultimate goal for us, for you listening, is to cultivate what our sources call a nomadic disposition, a philosophical survival strategy.
Cultural understanding, in the face of these overwhelming social forces, is linked to Edward Said's concept of the critic as a migrant or traveler.
You have to move beyond the idea of a fixed, authoritative center for culture or taste.
Exactly. The migrant, by definition, understands that perspective is relative.
So when we abandon the rigid categories in music, highbrow versus lowbrow, real versus fake, it challenges our ability to create rigid binaries in social life.
That's the hope. The ultimate goal is cultural understanding, which promotes a general tolerance by moving away from those entrenched, simplistic oppositions. White versus black, male versus female, or Christian versus Muslim.
The philosopher Richard Rorty speaks of the liberal ironist, right, who lives with unending curiosity and continual redescription.
And this acceptance of doubt and flux, this refusal to settle on a single, fixed reality, is the only viable strategy for preserving your individuality and autonomy in the face of overwhelming social forces and the culture industry that wishes to categorize and command you.
The flaneur, the sampler, the migrant, they choose to live on the margins, recycling culture, defiant of the system, even though they're still obliged to work within it.
And this nomadic disposition ensures that even if the culture industry provides the music, your relationship with that music, your interpretation, remains autonomous and unpredictable.
And that unpredictability is the only true resistance left in the age of the simulacrum.
It shifts the critical focus entirely. It moves away from judging the quality of the text or the intentions of the producer, and instead it places all the power onto the unpredictable, individual interpretive act of the consumer.
You. So we started this deep dive wondering if the revolutionary energy of the 60s was simply swallowed by commerce, rendered into a sign of rebellion rather than actual praxis.
And we identified the philosophical mechanism, the simulacrum, and then we watched it get perfected in the AI deepfake.
The deepfake shows us that the battle is no longer about preserving the original piece of art, but about preserving our conscious, unpredictable, individual engagement with it.
The machine can synthesize the aesthetic of the human voice, but it cannot predict the interpretive act of the listener. Not yet, anyway.
So the struggle continues between preserving your autonomy and submitting to the fatal strategies of the object, the algorithm, the deepfake, the canon. Forget the war between high culture and low culture. The real fight is between the fatal strategy of the object and your own consciousness. When you hit play on a new song, are you engaging in revolution or just accepting the sign the system built for you?
Thank you for sharing your sources with us for this deep dive. We hope this exploration gives you something to carry with you on your next nomadic expedition into the world of ideas.
Until next time.